Um, Q&A. How did you get to the project template again? All right, Paula. So we'll go to get to customs editor and into here working on this template. We'll go to the advanced menu. We'll come to customs editor. In our instance, we have to choose an org because we have a handful of them, and then we'll be able to choose the project type here. Here's where I just made that template a preferred template. Now we can see it's got that gold star. So this is the template we're working on right now. We've got tons and tons of templates in our org. You guys may have one, you may have three. It just depends on what you are working
Can you
on.
copy a project type?
Yes, so you can, if you have the permissions in place, this import export button here will allow you to export the entire template. So you can say export the entire template. When you click that, it's going to generate an export file. And then you can import that into a different Filevine org, or you can just import it into your same org and create a duplicate of the template. You can also export individual sections of a template. So maybe we only want the intake section. If you hit this little square with the arrow, it's going to export this specific section here, and you'll want to download that file. And then you can import that section into another template. Um, all right. Um, Bethany says that
So
we've had an
about
issue. Oh,
vitals and
information won't show up in expanded vitals, but does in the legacy vitals. However, it's not consistent among projects. Any insight on that? I do know that there are instances where team data does not show in the expanded vitals in the same way that it did in the legacy vitals. Um, there are a few field types like that that are, I believe they're being worked on, but I don't know for certain where we are on that. And I know there are certain types of fields that won't show up in the new vitals currently, but it's known and it's in process.
the expanded vitals are currently still in beta. And so they're not fully released to everyone. So with any issues that you're seeing with any of the features in Filevine not working properly or showing inconsistencies, you'll want to also make note of that and send that over to Filevine so that they can dive into the issue and diagnose kind of what's going on and fix it so that if it is widespread, they can make that happen. Or again, if it's just your org, they can kind of diagnose that. In
Yeah.
Filevine, there's a little question mark in the upper right-hand corner that will take you to Filevine's kind of like support page. You can chat in with them there and they can open up a support ticket for you. Um, or you should be able to leave feedback.
Yeah, so you'll go to this little question mark up in the top right-hand corner, and you can either share feedback or go to the Help Center and chat in with Filevine. All right, Paula, looks like you found what you were looking for. And then Julie asks if our project type's kind of like a page layout where you're collecting certain information depending on the type. So yes, that is sort of what project types are. Usually project types are dictated by practice area. That's not a hard and fast rule. There are some practice areas that can live in the same project type or the same template. But project types are essentially a template. So you may have a project type for criminal law and a project type for family law. Those track very different data points. So you would have two different templates or project types for those. You would house projects together in the same template or same project type that have similar data points that you're tracking primarily the same data in if it's two different law types, you'd have those under one template.
You'd also want to consider workflows. So, do they have
Mhm.
the same phases? Do they have the same tasks that are needed? Things like that are also important when considering projects.
Definitely, yes. So phases are a big one. So while you may be tracking similar data points, you may follow a totally different process. And if that's the case, then you'd likely want to split those out into separate project types. And so you can see here we have, we have a library of project types based on case law or workflows or data points. It really just depends on your firm, how you practice, and how you want to organize your data. Those are some great questions, guys. Um, so I'm gonna go a little deeper now into actually looking at these sections and different options that we have there. Um, so as you look at your sections, if you click into that gray space, that is going to expand and give you some more information or more options regarding that section. There are three main types of sections in Filevine. We have built-in sections, collection sections, and static sections. And built-in sections, you'll see this says built-in. Those are sections that are not really customizable and they serve a really specific function. So that's going to be things like your activity feed, your documents section, your related cases section, your deadline chains. Those are specific functionalities of Filevine that live in their own section and are created by default. We don't really get to customize those a whole bunch. Our collection and static sections are the sections that we are customizing, that we can change what you see on the front end with quite a bit of flexibility. So a static section is going to be any section that is essentially a form. You fill the data in once, you aren't adding in multiple items, it's static. Whereas a collection section is going to be any of the sections that have this add an item, where you're tracking multiple instances of similar items. So in this instance, in our medicals, we're going to be tracking our providers and then their related data. So as you are creating your new sections or editing your sections in the template, you'll be able to see what type of section each one of these are. If it's a built-in section, it will say built-in very clearly. If it is a collection section, it will say custom fields collection. And if it's static, it will just say custom fields. When you click into a built-in section, you can see there's not really a lot here to do. We can add some notes in if we want to. We can change the icon and the name if we want to, but that's really about it. Not a lot of customization there. But once we get into our custom sections, our static and collection sections, this is where we get to really do the customization of our template. Here at the top, we have our high level section items, our name, our notes, the section visibility, and then whether or not we want this to be a protected section. Section visibility, we have a handful of options here. It can be always visible, it can be always hidden, or it can be initially visible and initially hidden. If it's always visible, that means when you create a project, that section is always going to be there. You don't have to do anything. It exists automatically. But if it is initially visible or initially hidden, that means that you're able to toggle that section on and off. So down here on the left, we see manage sections, and anything that is marked initially visible or initially hidden will be in this list. And you can toggle that section on and off. So we've toggled on our referred out section. Now you can see here it is where it was not there previously. So if you want to be able to toggle those on and off, you set that up in Customs Editor under this default section visibility. Again, we can add internal notes. So this is just information for you guys internally. If you need to remember something about this section, maybe you have automations and they're built on something in this section, you would want to make notes there. Or it can be just like this, where it's kind of a general explanation of what this section is being used for. If you want to set up a protected section, you can do that here. If you toggle this on, that means that based on permissions that are set up on your teams, only people who have access to protected sections will be able to access this section if you toggle that on. Um, Additionally, for a collection section, they have a few more options here at the top. Let me get to a collection section. You'll see on collection sections, we have the show collection options. And when we click that, we get a few more options. This is one that I find a lot of people don't know about, but it's super helpful. So for your collection section, let me get into the same section so we're looking at it. Let me see. I'm gonna add just like two quick fake items in here so that it makes sense. Okay. Hmm. So on our collection options, we can set the default sort of our collection section. So what order do we want to see these items in? And then the default sort order. So maybe we want it by create date, but you can sort your collection section by any field in the section, and those will all be available to you here. So if we wanted to sort this section by our insurance company and we wanted it to be in alphabetical order, we would say insurance company. Once we save that and we refresh over here, it's going to default sort by how we have it set up in those collection section options. So you can see ambulance comes before Geico in our alphabet here. You can also set main fields, and main fields are going to be these big ones that you see. And in each view that you have, be it the list view or the card view, those main fields that we see here are going to be highlighted or the first fields that you see. So maybe we want our left main field to actually be insurance type. That's really important. We want to be able to see that very quickly. If we set that and refresh here, you'll see insurance type has been bumped to the front of this list. And if we look at it in our card view, our insurance type here is our left main field. So it's kind of spotlighted there. Excuse me. We also have collection export setup. This is more of a reporting thing, I think, and we talk about collection exports on our reporting free helps a fair amount. But you can set up reports for these collection sections where it will pull a report based on just the information in this project in this section. So you would build that report in your report builder, and then you would come here to Customs Editor and pick the report that you wanted to use for that export. We don't have any built out for this right now, but this is where you could set that up. Once you'd selected an export template, it would be available here to export. So those are kind of all of our high level customs editor um, setup fields. And so I'm going to dive a little bit into actually the customs editor, building your fields, building your template out. Excuse me. I apologize. I'm just getting over some strep throat and bronchitis, so I still got a little bit of a cough. Let's see. Julie says, can you add fields and sections to built-in projects? You might have said already. So built-in templates, and I'll go over which ones are kind of categorized as built-in. Any of them that say built-in here are going to be kind of default standard Filevine sections, and we can't really customize them. We can't add new fields. There's not a lot of wiggle room on those. That's going to be your activity section. When you go to create a new section, this is a great time to take a look at that. You'll select the name of your section. You will select your section visibility. You'll add notes in there if you'd like to. And then we get to section type, and you can see that these are all built-in sections. You'll know because it says built-in next to it. And you'll notice that these are specific types of sections. So contacts, billing, conflict check. If we add a contacts section, it's built in. We can't do any editing to that. It's just going to be the contacts of the project. But if we want to do a custom section, a static or a collection, we would select custom. Once we select custom, it allows us to indicate whether or not this is going to be a collection section. If it is a collection, you'll check that box. If it's not, you'll leave it unchecked. Once you save it, you can't change it to a collection section or back from a collection section. Once you save it, it is what it is. Those are the sections, and we're going to look at this in a second, that you can really do editing and adding fields to. So I'm going to, actually, I'm going to go through the whole process of doing a test section, and then we can clear it out when we're done. Test section. So we're going to name our test section. It's going to be, apparently somebody already had that idea. It's going to always be visible. We don't need to toggle it on and off. We're going to do a custom section, and we're not going to do a collection. We're just going to do a static section. Before we can start any additional setup on this new section that we're working on, we have to save the section first, whether it's a collection or a static. So we're going to save this section. Once you've added your new section in, you're going to need to put it in order where you want to see it in your template. It will default to the top, but we don't want this to be the first section. We want to see this somewhere else in the list. So we're going to hit this little arrow until we get it to where we want it to be. So I want this section to be a little further down. We're going to put it under insurance. Once you get your section to where you'd like it to live, you can click that back open, and now you're going to be able to add in your fields and widgets. So I'm going to do a kind of a quick demo of adding in a subsection to a section, essentially. When you say add field or widget, you're going to get this create new field template. And you can see that we can add fields and we can add widgets. The difference between fields and widgets is mainly that widgets, again, much like built-in sections, widgets serve a very specific purpose. So a widget is going to be an action button, a doc generation widget, an instruction field, report fusion generation, or maybe a subsection header. Whereas a field is going to be where you actually have your text fields, your date fields, your currency fields. And so that's the main difference between a field and a widget. So we're going to build out a little subsection. So we're actually going to start with a widget, and we're going to use the subsection header.
And
And
Anna,
these,
sorry,
yep.
somebody's asking if you could go over collection versus static again.
Oh, yep, for sure. So real quick, a collection section is going to be any section that has this add an item. So you're going to be tracking multiple iterations of the same type of data. Whereas a static section is going to be just a form. You're only going to fill this information in once. You're not going to have multiple case summaries. You'll have one case summary, but you'll have multiple insurance companies, multiple medical providers. So that's the primary difference between the two. Look for this add an item, and if you see it, that means it's a collection section. All right, so back to our little test subsection, we're going to add a widget, and we're going to start with our subsection header. And these subsection headers are really important because this is what gives you your table of contents at the top of any section. So this header text is what we want that header to say, or what we want our field to say. And then we'll want to look at our advanced properties, because our advanced properties are going to be where we can dictate where we want this to show up in our template. The row that we add a widget or a field to is always going to default to the next available row. Because this is a brand new section, the next available row is row 1. And then we can set our visibility, and we're going to go over that in a second. We want this to always show up. So I'm going to hit create. Now that I have an actual field in my section, if I come back to my template and refresh, we're going to be able to see our new section. Test section 2 is the one we just created. You can see we have subsection here. We won't get our table of contents until we add in another subsection. So I'll add in a subsection header, another one in a moment. So now we want to add in some data points. We're going to add in some fields. We have a multitude of field types. We probably don't have enough time to go through all of them in depth, but I will say this. It is really important when you're adding fields to your template to make sure that you're using the correct field that matches the data that you're trying to capture. So if you want a date, you want to make sure you're using a date field. If you're tracking money, you'll make sure you're going to make sure you're going to want to make sure you're using a currency field. And it can be really easy to maybe use a decimal field instead, or even just a text field to track currency or dates. And you can do that, but it's not advisable. Best practice says use the correct data type for your data point. It helps with reporting primarily, so it's going to make it a lot easier to report on currency items or dates. Each of these specific field types has kind of special functionality when we're talking about reporting. Julie asks if the field type can be changed after created. That's a great question because the answer is generally speaking, no. And so it's very important that you get your field types right from the get-go, because if you set it up with maybe the incorrect data type and you're using it for 6 months and then you're like, oh, I need to actually change that to a currency field, you cannot change it. You can create a new one and obsolete the previous one. But that can cause some reporting difficulties. There are a few fields that can be changed, the field type, and that's mostly going to be these text fields. So if you create a single line text field, we'll start with that, and we'll say that this is going to be, I'm drawing the blank here. I don't want to use a contact. Let's see, injury description. Um, we can say text single line. It's going to, again, default to our next available row. We want to always see this. We'll create it. You'll see if we go back into this, we're able to change that to another text field type, but we lose most of our field types. So the text ones you can change, but only because that's not going to really change the data type. So we'll add a couple of other fields in so I can show you how to place them. I'll refresh over here so you can see what that looks like now that we've added in our first field. So now we've got our text field, but we want to add in additional fields and we want them to be in the same row as our first field. Whoops, I'm going to close out of that. So let's go ahead and add a date field next, and we're going to say date. And we want this field to be directly next to our injury description. You'll see it defaulted us to row 3, but we don't want it on row 3. We want it on row 2, and we want it at the next spot in this row. So our injury description is at 2-0. We want this one in the next spot, so that's going to be at 2-1. And we're going to say create. And we'll see over here. And just a quick thing, anytime you make a change in customs editor, to see it on the front end of the template, you'll need to give it a refresh. So now you can see we now have our date field in here as well. And then I want to show you guys a quick contingency. So this is one of the, I think, and when I started using Filevine, I was so excited about it. Contingent fields. So we can have different fields populate based on prior fields. Excuse me. So I'm going to go with a yes, no on this. So let's say, did client sign? And I'm going to put this directly next to my date reported. So again, we're going to go back to row 2 and we're going to put this at order 2. We have something in 0, we have something in 1. We're going to put this in 2. I recommend that you don't go more than 3 across. Sometimes you can go 4 across, but any more than that, it starts to kind of condense and you get a funky looking template on the front end. So try to keep it 3 across, and even further than that, pro tip, try to keep everything 3 across because it makes it a lot easier on the eyes when you're looking at your template if it's consistent and evenly spaced. So we're going to come back here, we're going to refresh, we'll see our yes, no field. So here's our yes, no, and now we're going to build in a contingency. So let's say we want to know the date that the client signed if the client did in fact sign. So we want a date field because that's the type of data we're tracking. We want date client signed. It's going to default to the next row, and that's okay with me. We're moving on to the next row because I've already got 3 in the row above. And the contingency is going to be built here in visibility. So we want to show when did client sign equals yes. So now anytime when did client sign equals yes, this field will populate.
And
We
if,
oh,
sorry, I was going to say if you do equals, it has to be exact, including capitalization, punctuation, or whatever else. If you do contains, it has a little bit more flexibility.
and I will usually do contains on any contingency that's not on a yes no. On yes no, I'll do equals just because it's a yes and a no. But Jasmine is exactly right. 9 out of 10 times I use contains because it will capture a little more data that way, and it's a little more forgiving for sure. Here in internal notes, we usually do this here at Mind Skills, and I think it's a great tip so that as you're working in Customs Editor, you can quickly at a glance see if you have contingencies built out. We will, in the internal notes, say, show when did client sign contains yes. And you'll see in just a second why this is helpful. So when we create this field, you'll now see that note that I put in here shows up right here in gray. If we didn't have that note in there, you'd have to click into the field, look at advanced properties to see if there are any contingencies built on it. And as you're working on a template in Customs Editor, that can be really cumbersome. So I highly recommend that if you build contingencies out, you use this internal notes to indicate that. So now we've got our contingency. Again, we're going to refresh. We got to do it every time. So when I say yes, we now get our date client signed field. If I say no or unknown, we're not going to see that field. There are a couple of additional options when you're creating a field. I'm going to use one of our existing fields for this. So let's say that if the client signed is a critical piece of information and you need to know this, you can make this a required field. And what that means is that when somebody is working in this section, it will, one, have a little red asterisk next to it. So now this notates that this is a required field. And, broken arm.
And you'll notice that the unknown option on the yes nos will disappear if you require it.
Yep. No unknown option. And now we're not able to save this section until we indicate yes or no on this field. And once we've indicated one, it sticks. We're going to say yes, the client signed, and now we're going to save it. So that will encourage people to fill in fields that you indicate are required.
You do want to be cautious with requiring a ton of fields because staff might not have the answer when they're first going in to input data. And so you want to make sure that your required fields make sense and that folks aren't going to put data in there that's not accurate to save the section and then forget that they've put inaccurate data in there. So keep that in mind.
Yep, that is exactly right. So kind of rule of thumb is you'll want to use it sparingly and only use it for fields that you will have the information at the time of working in that section. A few other little tidbits here. You can lock a field. In the future, if you guys forget what we talked about, if you hit these little question marks, it will give you a little note about it. If we lock a field, that means that it can only be edited by a project admin. So project collaborators on a project would not be able to edit this field if we have it locked on the back end. This is, useful if there's sensitive data that you don't want everybody to be able to change. And then our final option is to obsolete a field. So I'm going to obsolete the date reported field. You will obsolete a field if it's a field that you are not going to be using anymore. You cannot delete a field from Filevine if there's data in that field anywhere, even in archived projects. So obsolete will allow you to remove the field without losing your data. So if we hit obsolete here, what's going to happen is in any project where that field has data in it, like this one does, it's going to look like this with a grayed out with a line through it. But if we remove this data, you can see that field is no longer there. So if there's no data in that field, you will not see it in the template. And that means any new projects created moving forward after you obsolete a field, you won't be able to see that field. Any projects that do have data in it, you can remove the data from the field. It will take it out of the template, but it will retain that data for you so that you don't lose it, even if you're obsoleting a field. Excuse me. Okay, so quickly, I'm going to take a look at widgets. Within widgets, this again, just as a quick refresher, these are going to be things that serve a specific function. They're not just housing data, they're an action item. So we have an action button, and within an action button, we have a few different types here. We can add in a link button. These are super useful. So let's say that you want to link to another section in your template. You want somebody to be able to get very quickly from your test section to your liens section. You're going to take your URL here, and we're going to say go to liens section. We can add a little icon here. I'm going to say, give it an arrow. And then I'm going to say same as widget name. So you can name this differently than what the widget actually is, but this is what the button is actually going to say. And then you'll put your URL here in the button URL. And then if you hit this question mark, you'll see that there are some replacement fields. These are fields like you would use in DocGens. And when we're linking to another section in your project, you'll have to replace the project ID with this field so that it will go to the project that you're currently in. So here's our project ID. Wow, that's a low number. So we replaced our project ID with that. You'll know it's the project ID because it's always the number directly after project in the URL that you take out of Filevine. You can choose to have this open in a new tab. So when they click it, it pops out into a new tab. And then I'm going to put this on row 3, order 1, next to my date client signed. We'll say create. We'll refresh here. We'll go back to our test section. Now we have this button. When we click it, it's going to pop out. It's going to take us to the liens section of the project that we're currently in. It's one of my favorite widgets. I think it is super helpful. It can really create some efficiencies for your team if you have links from one section to another within your templates. A couple other widgets we've got in here are our doc generation. So if you want to set up a place for your team to generate documents, you first need to create the widget. You can't set up the docgen here in docgen setup until the widget exists in customs editor. So just like any of the other fields, we'll name it. We're going to call it test docgen. We can set a DocGen widget to auto move to a folder in our default folder tree. So anytime a document's generated here, it'll automatically go into the folder that we select. And then again, I'm going to put this in my row so that we are going 3 across and everything looks nice and neat. I'm going to say create. We'll come back here and give it a refresh. And now we have our DocGen widget. There's no template here. We don't have one created, but now it will be available to you in your DocGen setup to create that document template. The DocGen widget that I just used is a single DocGen button. We also have doc generation multi-template, and I recommend that you use that at all times, essentially. I can't tell you how many times we've used a button and then it turns out that you want to be able to generate more documents in that spot. You can't change your single DocGen button to a DocGen multi-template. So I always like to start with the multi-template that allows you to add as many DocGen templates in one spot as opposed to having to add a button for each individual docgen. We also have instruction fields, and I think instruction fields are underutilized. The more instructions you have in your template, the easier it is for your team to know what it is that they're supposed to do. So instruction fields are just what they sound like. You can insert instructions into various spots in your template. So we're going to say widget name is test instructions. For instructions, you're never going to see this on the front end. What you're going to see is this instructions text. So these are instructions. Check them. There are some cool little formatting tips and tricks that Filevine has. They have an article about it in their help section. I know some of them by heart, but you can look at that little chart and they have how you can bold your text or how you can underline your text or how you can make it into a header or turn it purple. There are all kinds of different things you can do. And then once we say create, I'm just going to have it go to row 4. We'll refresh. Is there a way to print out a section setup? Um, there is not like a default print option. I think you can do like a print screen. I like Go Full Page. It's a add-in that we use in Google Chrome, and it will scroll down an entire page. If you have your section open, you'll be able to see that whole list. It'll scroll through it. But there's not like a native way to print out a section setup. Here are the instructions I added in. You can see they're big and bold because I added in some formatting, but you can insert instruction text anywhere you want throughout your template. You can see in our free help template, these are instruction texts here. So these are bulleted lists. It's really helpful. It's giving guidance on what needs to be completed for intake. Here's another good example of our action buttons, so link buttons to go to our different sections based on our instructions here. You can get super creative with that. Let's see. Any one last widgets I want to look at before we kind of wrap up? We have our report fusion. I'm not going to dive too deep into this. We do a free help on fusions in and of itself because it's such a deep topic. But if you are setting up a report fusion, much like DocGens, you need to have a report fusion widget set up in order to run that report fusion. So you would set that up in Customs Editor. So that is really the very high level look at Customs Editor. You can spend a lot of time in there. You can get really creative with your contingencies. But again, that's where the Filevine magic happens. That's where you create your template. I love Customs Editor. I think it's so much fun. I love seeing what I've built on the front end. So I hope you guys learned something new and exciting in there. Are there any last minute questions before we wrap up?
While we wait for questions, thank you so much,
Thank
Anna.
you.
My apologies. My Zoom was just doing its own thing and everything, so I appreciate you rolling with it. There are some links that I put in the chat, as well as my email and Anna's email. It's just our first names at vineskills.com. If you all want to engage in any of VineSkills services, including maybe helping to revamp some of your sections, utilizing the customs editor, helpful things like that, we are here. Feel free to reach out and we can get you connected with a optimizer to kind of help you all through that. If you have any other Filevine products, we're more than happy to kind of help with those as well. We do all things Filevine. We have all of the data up on our website, pricing and everything like that. You can also contact us to kind of get an idea of what cost and timeline would look like for whatever you all are interested in. It looks like there's one last question. Can you demonstrate the multi-docgen creation?
Absolutely. So the multi-docgen is going to be a widget. So we'll go here, and it's going to be this docgen multi-template. We'll say multi-template test. Again, we can auto move to a folder. Oh, and we can also add auto tags. I'm glad I went back here actually, because if you want tags applied to any document generated here, you can add those at this point. And then I'm going to put this at 4, 1. So now if we refresh, you'll see the difference between the button and the multi is really this. So the button is you're only going to be able to have one template associated with it. With the multi template, you can have as many as you want. Whatever templates you associate with this widget will be listed here and available to generate in this widget.
Perfect. All right. Hopefully you all join us for another free help session. Again, contact us if you'd like to engage in any of our services. Thank you again, Anna, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Jasmine. Bye.